Hi everyone. If someone would like to sit here, it's fine. Don't have to be sitting right at the back. Yeah. So, welcome everyone. I would like to pay my respects and acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land. I'll be your facilitator for this morning. I'm Dakina. I work at the center as a research practice lead. I'm really happy to welcome Susana Silva from Young People's Outreach Program. She is from the program, but working at Domestic Violence Crisis Service, Canberra. Susana will speak about her YPOPs, child and family practitioners, and their work with children aged 5 to 12, assisting recovery from domestic and family violence. So please give her a round of applause for Susana.
Thank you. Hello. Oh, this is really weird. Do we need this microphone? Okay, cool. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Susana. I'm from Canberra. And I forgot your name. As Lakina? Oh, yeah, close enough. As she said, I'm from the Domestic Violence Crisis Service in the Young People's Outreach Program. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. So I think there was a bit of interest from the organisers of the event because there aren't as many programs for children under the age of 12 here in Victoria, and also family violence specific programs for children under 12. So I was invited to make an expression of interest to come and speak here about the work that we do in that space in Canberra. But before I start, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting in and pay respects to their elders, past, future, and present. And I also want to say that I'm really grateful to be here today. I know I'm very passionate about the work that I do. I really love my job. So to be here in Victoria, where you guys are the leaders in this field, is really awesome for me personally. So thank you for being here and listening to me. And I love that I get to share what I do with you guys today. How does this work? Is that it? It's right there. Whoop. So as I said, I'm from Canberra. I'm in the Young People's Outreach Program. We call it YPOP, and it's part of our 24/7 domestic violence crisis service in Canberra, and we're the only one, which is okay, I guess, because Canberra's pretty small. But DVCS, what we call the Domestic Violence Crisis Service, is a 30-year-old organisation where its core service has been the crisis line. So YPOP became a part of DVCS over 10 years ago now, and that's different from the crisis work that we do. It has to do then with that long-term therapeutic intervention for children. But it didn't start that way. It actually started working with adolescents who used violence at home. It started as YPOW, so it stood for Young People's Outreach Worker. And this was over 10 years ago, so way before my time. But it was funding for one DVCS worker and one child protection worker in the ACT to work with adolescents who were using violence. But it later formed and changed into what it is now, what we call YPOP, and it's now focused on early intervention, trauma-informed early intervention, working with primary school-aged children. And there's two main reasons why it changed to what it is now. One of them was the demand in Canberra. We were getting more and more referrals for children who were displaying signs of trauma or using violence as a result of their family violence experience. So even though the relationship perhaps was finished and mothers were in a safe space and the child was in a safe space and there was some stability, the child was still displaying those hypervigilant trauma symptoms. And there were no specific family violence supports for those children. So that's where we kind of came in. So that was one reason. The second reason was the emerging evidence around supporting young children early on in their trauma recovery, and the benefits of that and the importance of that mother-child bond for building their resilience, which then contributes to their trauma recovery. So that's, I guess, where we came in. So as I go along, I'm going to be referring to women and children as the ones who experience family violence, but it's not to say that I don't acknowledge that the complexities of family violence and how it can go in so many different ways. I know it can come in various different forms, it can come from, a sister using violence against a brother or a nephew using violence against an aunt. I do acknowledge that, but I will be using the language of mothers and children as being submitted to violence and as fathers using violence. And the reason for that is because that's who we mostly work with in our program, mothers and children who experience violence, and also because of, statistically speaking, that's who are the ones mostly affected by family violence. So just kind of putting that out there before I continue. So why do we work from a family violence trauma-informed perspective, and why early intervention? That's why I'll be talking to you about today. But those quotes sum up those reasons really well, I think. And funnily enough, they're from Kathy Humphries. So when I saw her today, I was pretty shocked. I wasn't expecting to see her because I'm such a fan, and all of her models and frameworks we use in our program. So anyway, pretty exciting. So the first quote there says, "Not all children are equally affected by the violence and abuse they live with." And I can speak from my own practice that children their trauma presents in such unique ways, whether they are using violence or they begin to use violence at home or aggression, or whether they withdraw or present, regressive behaviors, or might present, with thoughts of suicide. It's so complex. As you would know, family violence is so complex, and children are affected so differently by that. So it's always something that we consider, but we always support them in the same trauma-informed way, no matter what the behaviors are that they are presenting. And then that second quote, it says, "At the extreme end, some children will die. However, at least a third do as well as those not identified as living with family violence. Protective factors will be in place." So that's, I guess, what we do, that early intervention work, because at least a third of children will do just as well as children who haven't experienced family violence. But protective factors need to be in place, and that's where we come in. It's supporting mothers and children to work on those protective factors to create better outcomes later in life. So what do I mean by early intervention? So it's what it says up there, what I've been saying. So we work with primary school age children, 5 to 12. Something that we consider is the length of time that the child has been displaying those behaviours showing the impacts of family violence, because that could influence how we might support them in their trauma recovery. The primary school age years are very important for the mother-child bond, and I have that up there because there's research that suggests that supporting the mother-child bond is the number one thing in supporting children to build their resilience, which then supports their trauma recovery. So those years are really important for that mother-child bond. But as we know, because of family violence, those bonds can sometimes get fractured. In a lot of cases, that's what happens. So a lot of active work may need to be done in that space. And also, I think Kate was saying before, when children are in primary school, they might they often do have more buy-in into the family and what's happening. So they're more influenced by the family and their school environment. Also, if they're in primary school, they get that primary school support, which looks very different from high school. So in primary school, in Canberra, we have NSET, which is part of our Department of Education, and they can provide care teams and social workers and occupational therapists to be part of that child's trauma recovery. We can engage children's teachers and the school community to support in that process, support us and the children in that process. So we're not just working in a silo with the child. So those are really important years to kind of start doing this work. So I just have a little case study, so sorry about that. They're not very well written, but I'll just read it out to kind of put it into context what I'm trying, I guess, to bring across to you guys. And this is just an example of like a classic referral that we might get to our program, YPOP. And I'll just read it out, just I guess, to put everything into context. So this is Sam's story. Sam is an 8-year-old boy who has been referred to YPOP as he has been struggling at home and at school. Sam's parents, Jenny and Scott, separated 12 months ago. Jenny left the relationship due to Scott's emotional and physical abuse towards her and Sam. Jenny has since worked hard to establish safety and stability. Things seem to be going well for Jenny and Sam during the first few months of separation. But over recent months, Sam has begun to show a lack of interest for the things he once used to do. He has fallen behind academically and made no friends at his new school. Sam has expressed thoughts of suicide and has been violent and aggressive towards Jenny and peers. So this is, I'd say, a classic referral. And, maybe, the violence might be finished in that family's life, but the child obviously is still struggling with the trauma from those experiences. So just talking a little bit about our trauma-informed practice and what that means, and more specifically a family violence trauma-informed practice. And I have that picture there of the safe and secure framework. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. Kathy Humphries also worked on that, which is pretty exciting. So in YPOP we use a whole range of different resources and frameworks, but I'd say this one is probably the core of our program and the basis of how our program was built. So what trauma-informed practice means is that we see the behaviors as learned based on trauma experience. They either learned or they have been developed, whether it was to, as protective mechanisms due to the violence that was experienced or due to the fact that, this child was living in an environment of dread and fear. And these were the mechanisms that I guess they developed, whether they were learned, or modeled, or whether they were just developed due to those survival mechanisms in place that take over when you're in that constant a level of fear and survival mode, really. So no matter what the behavior is, we treat it as that. It's not so much the behavior that we focus on, but the causes of those behaviors. So I think, as some people have already spoken today, so the family violence-related trauma changes the arousal within children. So it shapes those neural pathways that are being formed during development. And we know that if a child has been hypervigilant or has been in survival mode throughout their childhood, throughout their development, those are the neural pathways that are going to be strongest. And that's why sometimes we see those really challenging, aggressive behaviors. There's a reason for that, because those perhaps are those neural pathways that are strongest, the survival ones, which means that the child might be more reactive. But I won't get into all of that science. I'm sure it's all things that you already know, but I guess that's where we work from. So as it says there, we address the trauma to address the behavior. I've already said that. So the focus is not the behavior so much, but the causes of that behavior. And we support the mother to understand the children's behavior. So that's really important that the mother is included in that process. So for example, in YPOP, we don't work with any children in out-of-home care because that's just the model that we follow. We work with children that have a primary carer, usually the mother. And it's really important for the trauma recovery to have that connection and that support from that primary care. Okay. keep going. So this framework here is just an extract from the Safe and Secure model. And I won't go on too much about this, but I find this a really good visual to understand what children need in order to start their trauma recovery. So, for example, the three foundations, those three foundations need to be in place in order for us to start working with children. So, for example, I can't read down there. Sorry, get my slides here. So the first one, the bottom one, ensure cultural integration. I mean, that's a foundation, but that should be done throughout the whole of intervention, as you would know. The support network engagement and collaboration, that again has to do with not working with children in silos, but engaging the community, engaging the family, and making sure that you're working collaborative with other agencies and support services for the child, because there's no point you working with the child on their own without any input from other services or family members. Otherwise, it's just redundant doing that. That one, the top one of the foundation, the addressing dynamics of family violence, is really important. So in order for us to start working with a child in YPOP, or in order for any child to start their trauma recovery, they need to be safe and there needs to be stability. It's actually very unsafe for you to start working with a child who might still be experiencing violence. And an example of that would be the referrals that we often get from agencies where children still have unsafe contact with their, usually the father who's still using violence. And they might have contact because of family law orders and things like that. And we actually can't, it's really awful, but we can't work with those children because it's unsafe to do that. Because if we're teaching them different strategies and mechanisms to understand their brain and their behaviors and their triggers, and they start to change those while still experiencing violence, it puts them in a very unsafe place. So we need those three foundations in YPOP before we even start working with children. Where YPOP comes in would be in that strengthening connections, enable meaning making, and promoting growth and recovery. So that's, I guess, the core of our work. And even though we have safety there as an outcome, usually that's done through, crisis services, police, all of those things, the mother establishing their safety. But then YPOP comes in a little bit in there because, as of what I said before, children might be physically safe, but they might not feel safe. So that enable meaning making and enhancing connections, it's supporting them to start having those feelings of safety. So I won't go too much more about that, but I will explain, I guess, how our program fits into that model. So like the first line says there, I think that's the core message. It does not matter what behaviors the child is displaying. We still work with them in the same way. Of course, every intervention looks different because people are unique, but we still come from those family violence trauma-informed perspective when working with them, even if those behaviors is aggression or violence. We still work from that trauma perspective. The first thing we do is support mothers to understand those behaviors and understand what's happening for the child. So we, before we even start working with a one-on-one with the child, we'll engage the mother in at least 4 parent sessions. 4 is the minimum, to help them to understand the context of family violence, how it might have impacted them as a mother, how it might have impacted their parenting, how the child's behavior might still be a trigger for them. So we explore that with them. And we also then do some psychoeducation around how the brain develops when in a family violence context. So explaining children's triggers and then developing strengths-based strategies to learn for the mother to be able to start co-regulating and learning how to support their child during those, I guess, those outbursts or acting out behaviors. So that's a core of our work, and before we even start working with the child, the mother needs to be really across that kind of information, because we need them as part of that therapeutic intervention. So the 3 domains that we work on when we're supporting mothers and children is what I have there, those 3 dot points: safety, relationships, and connections. So I've already explained safety. So if you look at the framework from before, that strengthening connections and enable meaning making falls into that safety. So it's supporting children to create a narrative, an empowering narrative of their experiences of family violence and what has happened with the mother and their siblings, whoever is relevant in their family, and also working with the mother and the child to be really clear around that the use of violence and threats of violence are no longer acceptable and will not be acceptable, and creating a narrative around that and around their family as a whole. What do they want that to look like? What's their new identity as a family? Because usually when we work with these families, it's a post separation from that family violent relationship. So relationships is a second domain. So like I said earlier, family violence can really fracture that mother-child bond, and siblings as well, those relationships with siblings. So we do a lot of active work there in reconnecting those. And really, they're actually really simple things. It's just creating opportunities for fun and engagement away from the problem, to be curious, to play, and just to be together. We even have a support group as part of our program called Growing Together, which is for mothers and children, where they get an opportunity once a week to come together and engage in play together. And that's literally what the group is, but it's really helpful for those parents to then start engaging their children in that way. I know I've worked with mothers who didn't even know how to play with their kids. They didn't even know how to engage them in play. So even something as simple as that can go a long way. And then connections is our last domain. So by connections, I mean connecting the child and the family with community. So that could be schools, that could be extracurricular activities. Often we have to go and do a lot of work in schools with teachers, especially if the child does use violence at school. And we have to create an understanding for teachers and do some psychoeducation around their sorry, I just saw someone familiar there and lost my track of thought. We have to do a lot of psychoeducation to help them understand those behaviours. So it's that trauma-informed perspective in the classroom, which is really tricky to do because teachers have so many students to manage, and often the child gets labelled as the naughty child, as the naughty kid. So a lot of work needs to be done there to create those understandings around trauma. Another thing that we do is outreach support, which I personally think it's invaluable for the work that we do, because instead of asking the child and the family to come into your space, which is strange and unfamiliar and sometimes can be a bit clinical, we actually stepping into their world, and they get to share with you, the things that they love to do, the places that they love to go, and we'll do YPOP visits within the home, or we'll do school pickups and take the child somewhere that they love to go, or we'll just come into the school, whatever works best for the family. And I really love that about our program, and I feel like it makes all the difference when you're trying to build rapport with the family. So we do weekly and fortnightly visits, depending on the needs of the child, but something that we do is that we make sure that it's always on the same day and at the same time, to start to create that predictability for children, that consistency that would have not been present in their lives during their experiences of family violence. So if let's say we're going to do a school pickup instead of a home visit at 4 o'clock, then we'll make sure that we give them notice, and we always give them a calendar, and they get to write down the time and the date so they know what to expect. And that's really important, that predictability. And our interventions last from 6 to 12 months. So it just depends, again, on the needs of the child, but we wouldn't go more than 12 months because we wouldn't want to create that dependability for the family, and we would want to reconnect them to community supports. And lastly, it's a voluntary program. So what that means is that the mother needs to want to be a part of YPOP, and so does the child. If the mum wants it, but the child is not too keen on it, we won't work with that family. It's really important that they both have buy-in into the program. But look, I think there's been one child since my 3.5 years in YPOP. There's been like one child that hasn't wanted to engage in the program, because it's an opportunity for them to feel special, to feel heard, to feel listened to, and I personally think it's a really special thing. All right, so I'll just finish off with a really bad case study. Sorry, and I've typed this up really badly as well, but I'll just read it off here just so you can, again, to put it into context for you, and then feel free to ask me questions after that. So, Sam's story continued. So YPOP was deemed a suitable support for Sam due to his current safety and stability, and his behaviours were showing the impacts of domestic and family violence. Ashley, Sam's YPOP practitioner, started the intervention by working with Jenny. They met for 5 parent sessions. Jenny was able to discuss her experiences of family violence, their impact on her as a mother, and on Sam's behaviour. Ashley explained the impacts of trauma on a child's developing brain and discussed with Jenny strengths-based ways to support Sam in creating new coping strategies around his triggers and big feelings. Ashley then began working with Sam. The first stage of intervention was focused on building rapport. Meetings with Sam were conducted at home alongside Jenny. Once rapport was built, because it's so clear-cut like that. Anyway, once rapport was built, after-school pickups became more frequent. Ashley helped Sam create goals and a plan for achieving them. Ashley supported Sam to first understand and name his feelings and later his triggers. Ashley supported Sam to create a narrative around his experience of violence from Dad by using his Pokemon Chikoritas to tell his story. Every second visit was conducted at home to foster the mother-child bond. Ashley connected Sam with children's adventure groups and had regular contact with Sam's teachers around supports and trauma-informed responses. The YPOP intervention lasted 9 months, and Sam and Jenny both reported positive outcomes around feelings of safety, relationships, and connections. Something I forgot to say is that our program, unfortunately, has never been evaluated, which is really sad. I know my team leader is currently working on that, trying to get that happening, which would be great. But how we measure outcomes is through the mother and children themselves. So we do evaluations halfway through intervention and then at the end of intervention. But the beauty as well of working for a 24/7 crisis service is that sometimes those clients call back, sometimes to check in, sometimes to give an update on their situation, or sometimes things have changed for them and they need some extra support from the crisis line. So that's really, it's kind of nice having that, because then we can kind of touch base and see how they're going. But that's it, enough out of me. Thank you for listening, and any questions? Oh, good, no questions, great.
Hi Susana, I'm Lee Fitzroy. I work in Geelong at one of the Orange Doors, which is a pilot in Victoria. I was really interested in the work you're doing, and it sounds fabulous. I love the fact that it's sitting within a specialist family violence service, because obviously that's always been a gap. One of the questions I had is when you mentioned that you're not able to work with young people who've still got contact with a father who may have been identified or has been charged with offences, family violence offences. I wondered what your advice would be for services around how best to respond to the needs of those children, because we're obviously grappling with that issue as well, as are mothers who are being forced to send their children to have access with Dad every second weekend, and then we've got issues around ongoing trauma, cumulative trauma for her and the kids. So any advice for us, because I know government's also in the building. Not that I've got an agenda or anything.
That's a really good question, and it's something that we struggle with all the time, and we did for years, and it's just awful because I feel like there's a huge gap in that space. And just to clarify, it's we don't work with a child because they're having contact with their father or the person using violence. We don't work with them if that contact isn't safe. So if it is like supervised visits or if it's deemed safe enough, then we will. But yeah, it's those unsafe contacts, which is usually the case. And what we did, so for years we would only work with kids who were in that situation, but we got lots of referrals like that, and we acknowledged that gap, and it was really awful. So about a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, we started implementing the 4 parent sessions, the minimum of 4 parent sessions for those mothers, and then supporting them to support their child, if that makes sense. So, mums would say, he comes back from Dad's and he's, it's like a war zone, and they're really escalated and they can't settle, and it's like during the week we'll take 3 steps forward, and then he comes back from dad and he's taking four steps back, which is really tricky. So what we've done is we've offered the parent sessions for those mothers, and then we try and connect them with some sort of program for herself or for the child after those 4 parent sessions. But that's the tricky part. Any work that you do with children in this space will be like maintenance work, kind of just maintaining and containing what's happening now, and really safety planning with them. Safety planning with children is so important. Keeping that narrative around their experiences of violence is really important. But yeah, sorry, no clear-cut answers. But I know being able to offer parents those sessions has been a bit of a relief. It's something that we can offer that could, maybe just put a little dent or a little extra something in that mother's back pocket to help her in her situation. So that's how we've addressed it. But sorry, I don't have the clear answer. Oh, yeah.
Listening, I think what you do is great. Yet so much still rests on the woman. What is going to do? Because there is a father somewhere that is taking responsibility. And I'm sitting very
It's a good comment, and then I feel like in this space that happens a lot, where the father or the person using the violence then becomes invisible, and the onus is then on the mother to do all this incredible, amazing work. That I can't even imagine how they seem to get all of this done, and after everything that they've been through, it is amazing. But yeah, great comment, but I'm also just as baffled as you. But I feel like in our practice it's really important to constantly empower women and talk, and part of this parent sessions is talking about self-care strategies, and if mum's is looking after her mental health, the children will automatically benefit from that. But yeah, I agree with your comment. Yeah, well said. Oh, someone else. Sorry, am I allowed to keep going?
It's just on an associated note around not working with children in out-of-home care. So I'm wondering what you're defining that is, when we know that people are put in care short-term, or there's still a connection with the family.
Yes, so yeah, we will work with, out-of-home care is if they don't have a primary caregiver. So if they have a primary caregiver, we'll work with them. But there's no reason around that, it's just how we're funded. So usually it's mothers and children, but we have worked with dads, grandmothers, any other kind of primary caregiver, I suppose. Does that answer your question? Yes, but then there's our Canberra program, so probably not worth me repeating them here. I don't know. Yeah, cool. Thank you.